In previous episodes of Powering New Zealand, we were introduced to our earliest electricity pioneers and our great Kiwi inventors. In this episode, we concentrate on more recent achievements in New Zealand's energy sector.
So these previous episodes have told some amazing stories of our great power heroes from the past. But Kiwis seem pretty innovative by nature, so surely the stories don't stop there.
No way. No, we continue to be world leaders in the energy sector right up to today. But the path to today hasn't always been smooth. By the 1980s, the energy sector was in a sorry state.
So why was that?
Politics. Remember Muldoon's Think Big? That had a lot to do with it, but there were some other factors as well. After the energy scares of the 70s, Muldoon's government had sunk huge amounts of money into projects that weren't viable. Power stations built that weren't needed, an oil-fired power station which never ran, and new hydro schemes which blew the government's budget. In fact, in 1983, a Treasury report revealed that $3 billion in 1983 dollars had been wasted in recent electrical investment. But over the previous 30 years, government spending on electricity made up 30 to 45% of the budget. It was unsustainable.
It definitely sounds like a bit of a mess, and something had to change, which explains why when the new Labour government began its radical reforms in 1984, privatising electricity was high on the agenda. The industry needed new money and new projects, but no one was going to risk investing in the industry unless there was a trusted way of determining the price of electricity. This required a new wholesale market, something that only one or two other countries were seriously pursuing at the time. It was time for a new kind of innovation. I spoke to two women who made a big contribution to the new market, which put New Zealand at the forefront of global electricity developments yet again. Gillian Blythe was a young consultant with London Economics who helped convince the corporatised state generation business, ECNZ, to actively support the new market. Gillian then moved to New Zealand to help with the development of that new market. And Christine Southey was an established lawyer who helped separate out and then establish Contact Energy from ECNZ. Christine was a driving force in establishing new governance arrangements in both the electricity and gas industries. Gillian, how did you end up coming from London to New Zealand?
So the first time I came from London to New Zealand was with London Economics for the Wholesale Electricity Market Development Group, or WEMDIG, which was looking at restructuring ECNZ from being a single entity into multiple parts in the forerunner for the, beginning to think about the wholesale market. And there was going to be a need to create rules for a competitive market. And they said, why don't you come and have an overseas trip? And I was 26, and I thought, why not? I'll come and spend a year in New Zealand and work on the market. And
was that year in New Zealand turned into something a lot longer, ultimately?
Ultimately,
yeah.
I did
turned
get
into a marriage.
Yes.
Christine, how did you get involved in the electricity industry?
Well, I started off in private practice in a large law firm and came to Wellington when my husband got appointed to a job at the Westpac Bank. And when I arrived at the Wellington firm, they were short of someone to work in the energy sector. So as the last one in the door, I got involved in that. I'd had a bit of an involvement in gas, so they thought that gas and electricity, they'd go together. And it was a very short time after that when the government decided that it wanted some advice. So the firm thought with me, with two brand new babies, it would be a great idea for me to do this project and sent me off to help split ECNZ.
How did the New Zealand industry look to you at the time when you got here?
I think one of the biggest differences to me was the lack of regulatory structures. So my work in London was for Offa, so for the electricity regulator in the UK, or for Offa Northern Ireland, and that was normal. And this was moving into a regime where it was going to be industry self-governance, and that took a bit of getting used to, of saying, we believe the market can do it all without any formal oversight from government or from a regulator.
Did you make any comment to the people here about your reflection, seeing that? Did you suggest to them that it was perhaps a little bit unusual or different to how things are done elsewhere?
It wouldn't have worked. I mean, that was quite an interesting part of that whole privatisation experience at the time. I mean, it was self-regulation. There was no concept that you needed to separate the monopoly part out from the bit that was potentially competitive.
Why was there a need for change in the 90s? Why did we need to change the course that we're on?
Significant overinvestment that had occurred, and this real sense that New Zealand was going to need ever-increasing amounts of capital to deal with the growth, and also a concern about the risk of poor decision-making that was happening in the government departments. So it was an attempt to improve, I think, the quality of the governance, the quality of the decision-making, and to access capital. The bit that was missing in all of this was what was going to be the regulatory regime that took place after you did that big effort. There was a big gap there, and I think that's where Gillian came in, because she did come in with an idea on how you could run a wholesale market, and the ECNZ got on board with that. They ran an internal market to trial how it might work. Well, in the same year that we're designing a wholesale market, we're actually building a whole new corporate entity, which is going to be a third of the wholesale supply in New Zealand, that needs to have all the things that any corporate needs to do. It didn't get the chance to grow organically. You just flick your fingers and there we had it. And we were moving into a competitive world with a brand new company, without any culture, without any systems for buying anything, and all the other bits and pieces. We dealt with all of those and designed a wholesale market in one year.
When you look back at where we were in early 1995, it's a very different world to where we are today.
It was a wild and rocky time, actually, those early periods after the company was first formed.
Christine, you mentioned that other countries were liberalising around the world. Does that mean there was a blueprint for how to do this and where you wanted to get to that you could draw on?
I think other countries were doing it over a different timescale. So I think that across quite a lot of countries, they were looking at what it is, which sectors were ripe for liberalisation, and that was coming in. New Zealand just jumped in and did it bigger, further, deeper than everyone else. We went longer on this experiment as well, and we just went further. I didn't find any precedence for practically anything that we did. Yeah, there was nothing we could borrow. It was very much making it up as we went along.
The number of blank pieces of paper, when you start to create a rule book and someone says information disclosure, and everyone goes, great idea. And you go, okay, what do we mean by information disclosure? And then not only what is it, how often, where will it go, who will be able to see it?
What are your proudest moments when you look back on what you have done over the last 20 odd years? What are you most proud of?
To know that you had gone from, a non-competitive world to suddenly a competitive market that was working successfully. I mean, that's pretty special to do that, and to know that we were, we were innovative as a market design.
So it must be immensely satisfying now to look back to 2018 and seeing that design that was put in place 1996 remain relatively stable through that. I mean, there's been tweaks and changes along the way, but it's remained relatively stable, and other people look on it with some envy, I think, for you to have played a key role in making that happen.
Oh, look, it's fantastic. It's a huge shift. We've, as a sector, there's been probably $9 billion that's been spent on new power stations. All of those those decisions have all been able to be made on the basis of a stable regulatory environment that gives you the confidence to be able to put a lot of money down into the ground to build a wind farm, a geothermal project.
And I'm sure you've probably stayed close to what's happened in the UK over a similar time frame. How do you think we rank compared to the electricity industry in the UK over the same period?
Oh, I mean, I think
so much better.
Yeah.
What we have been able to do, because of the market design and because of the resources that are available to New Zealand. I mean, we are the envy, of many jurisdictions, because we've got, 85% renewable. We've been able to build wind farms, we've been able to build geothermal without subsidies.
And I think that means that we've got quite a lot of hope and confidence for how the industry will solve the problems going forward. So if you take the example or anxiety that electric vehicles might all start taking from the grid at the same time, and what that means for security of supply, given the journey that we've seen and been involved with, we're pretty confident that the industry and the market will figure that out. I'd encourage people to go back and learn some of the good lessons in the 90s, because a lot was done by very small people in a very short period of time, because it was very collaborative.
I think the piece that we haven't talked about is retail, because that's, we've got, 30, maybe even 40 different brands that are competing in the electricity market. And I think that means that there's a lot more choice, than was perhaps ever envisaged. One of the things that New Zealand did very, very in a different way to overseas was New Zealand opened up the retail market for competition far earlier than anywhere else.
And more extensively as well.
Because
it wasn't partial, it was full.
Christine, proudest moments?
I think it was a great accomplishment to go from having just a blank sheet of paper to a fully working, well-agreed rule book, which has stood the test of time. But I think I probably would like to answer the question a little bit more personally. And one of my proudest moments was actually at the end of the second split of EC&Z. I bravely, at the start of the year, do a project plan for the entire project and said, we're going to be finished on the 20th of December. My proudest moment was at a drink session with, a couple of ministers, the EC&Z board, and the core people that had worked on this. Selwyn Pukushing came after a conversation with Geraldine Bowman to find out who I was, came marching across the room, and he said, "Are you Christine Southey?" And I said, "Yes, Selwyn." He said, "You're a day late."
Brilliant. Do you have any personal reflections on your time in the industry?
I think for me, it's about putting your hand up. For me, when I was 26, based in London, having been asked by EC&Z to come out for a year, I had to decide whether I was going to do it or not. And for me, it was, I didn't want to get to 60 and think, should I have gone? Would that have been a better route? And for me, it was about putting my hand up and seizing it. And if I was going back to the 26-year-old Gillian, I would say, do it again.
Now, not everyone agrees with the move to an electricity market, and it can still be controversial. But being New Zealanders, we did it right. The New Zealand electricity market is one of the first in the world.
It was hailed as a great success and served as the blueprint for many such markets. And it did bring in new ideas and new people, and some of them are world-leading.
So what are some of the things going on that are interesting?
Well, surprise, surprise, there is a lot going on. We caught up with Dion Campbell at Trustpower to learn about some of their most innovative and environmentally friendly forms of power production. But, as is the case in this fast-paced industry, before you know it, things change. Just after we filmed this in 2016, Trustpower split off a new business called Tilt. Dion is the CEO of Tilt and manages many Australian and New Zealand wind farms, including Tararua.
So the Tararua wind farm is New Zealand's first commercial scale wind farm. It's located in the hills to the east of Palmerston North. It has been built in 3 stages. There's 103 Vestas V47 machines and 31 V90s. We took over ownership when the first stage V47s were commissioned in '99. We built stage 2 in about 2004 and stage 3 in 2007. So now we cover around about 800 hectares. Probably the location is the special thing about it. It's located in an area of the ranges where the wind comes whipping under Australia towards New Zealand, and it sees the Tongariro sort of plateau, and it sees the hills out of Wellington, and this is the low point, so the wind funnels through it. So the Roaring Forties provide our resource there, and it has been the best performing wind farm, commercial scale wind farm in the world for a long time. The early machines made their lifetime energy production in their half-life, so in 10 years instead of 20. The new V90 machines, 2 of those machines are the highest producing wind turbines in the world. So it's a world scale performance wind farm. Against the international competition, the Tararua site has a couple of things going for it which helps its performance. One is the wind. The wind regime, the Roaring Forties, is world class. So we've got the right site. But then we combined on that right site the right technology choices. So the Vestas machinery on site, 2 different evolutions of machinery, were purpose built and purpose certified for that site. And we've also managed to have a relationship with Vestas. That means that they're comfortable bringing their new R&D work onto that site and applying it to our turbines. Yeah, Vestas is the supplier of our turbines for all of our sites in New Zealand. They are actually the world's #1 wind turbine supplier. They're based in Denmark and have been in the wind industry for 50 or more years. And so over the years, we've helped them with their gearbox designs, we've helped them with their maintenance routines. In the early days, for example, they would ship every main component back to Denmark and we'd get a new one back. And so now we rather repair gearboxes, we repair generators, hydraulic systems, all in New Zealand. So there's a capability being built up that means that that site is both efficient and also quite cost effective to run. And we've seen some of these things be rolled out around the world. We were also the first site to bring a per megawatt hour operations and maintenance charge, so they get money when we make money. And that regime was unusual back in the day when we started it here. So our performance in terms of reliability, maintenance requirements, etc., is as good as our newer wind sites that we have in Australia, say. So we are impacting the world wind farm industry with that site. It's a world standard site. If something works at Tararua, it will work anywhere. And they've got a client in Trustpower who is happy to have a wee test of things here and there. So we are never going to be bleeding edge, but we're happy to adopt little bits of innovation here and there. So it's a combination of good old Kiwi attitude to asset management, but also the hard rigour of a turbine supplier being applied in the same location. Works very well.
Dion did a great job of explaining the Tararua wind farm, but our next project is back to geothermal.
Its name is NaoaPeru, and the significance of that is a bit more technical to understand. So let's go to Professor Reeve. Where is that guy? So in the normal steam turbines that we're used to, the ones fired by gas and coal, they go through 3 stages. And that's because the steam is so hot that it can go through a high pressure stage, and then there's enough energy for a medium pressure stage, and there's still enough for a low pressure stage. Now geothermal fields have much lower temperature and pressures, and so the previous largest turbine only had 2 stages. But at NaoaPeru, they decided to go for 3 stages, and this made it the largest geothermal turbine in the world. Now partly this is because Rotokawa is a fairly hot field for most, but it was also a really ballsy engineering move. And this made NaoaPeru one of the most technologically advanced geothermal power stations in the world. And the really neat thing about NaoaPeru is that one of the world's most technologically advanced geothermal turbines is part owned by a Maori land trust. We met Kevin McLaughlin, the chief executive of Ringamato, the commercial company behind the Tauhara North No. 2 Maori Land Trust.
Tauhara North No. 2 Trust is an Ahu Whenua Lands Trust formed under the Murray's Lands Act. The trust owns a piece of land just north of Taupo, under which one of the foremost geothermal reservoirs in the world exists. Many years ago, the trust, in partnership with the Taupo District Council, established the Rotokawa Power Station, which is a 32 megawatt power station. Following on from that, and dabbling its toes in the warm waters of the Rotokawa Power Station, decided that it wanted a bit of skin in the game itself, and therefore the idea of the NaoaPeru Power Station and the further development of that field came about. Mighty River Power approached us wanting to further develop the field. So there were many meetings during which Makere Rangataheriri, who was our former past chair, and Doug Heffernan got together, trusted each other, and therefore a JV was born out of that relationship. The NaoaPeru power station is described as the largest single turbine geothermal power station in the world. It comes from a Maori word, NaoaPeru, meaning where the river divides and breaks into rapids. The NaoaPeru rapids sit on the Waikato River just below the trust land, so it's an important cultural and historical area that is relevant to the trust, and therefore the name was used for its investment in the NaoaPeru power station. On a daily basis, we're chugging about 138 megawatts out of that power station, and that's enough electricity to look after about 140,000 homes, around the country. So that's about 2% of New Zealand's power needs coming out of that power station. The investment in the NaoaPeru and Rotokawa power stations is a huge deal for the owners of the trust. It's the real good news story in this whole project. From the funds that are generated, we contribute to the health and well-being of our people by way of education grants, youth camps, tangihana grants. We pay for their primary care, their spectacles, hearing aids, their dentures. Everything that we're doing is designed to help our people and move them forward in life.
One of the recurring themes in our stories is how Kiwis grab the newest technologies, but then push them way beyond what people thought they could do. Now, New Zealand Post is doing just that. But you might ask, what do letters and parcels have to do with electricity? Well, we're here at the Auckland Mail Centre, so let's go in and find out. Mark Stewart is the Chief Operating Officer at New Zealand Post, and he was brought in to deal with some big changes that have come about since the advent of the internet.
So New Zealand Post is facing a kind of significant changing in terms of how its customers are using us. Far more people are communicating online, which means far less mail, but also people are buying and selling more things online, which means far more parcels. So to solve this problem, we're doing a number of things. So firstly, we're making a number of customer-facing changes, both for the people who send parcels and mail. We're making it far easier to integrate into our systems, but also for people who receive mail and parcels. From an operational perspective, we're actually looking to introduce about 500 Paxton delivery vehicles, which will deliver mail and parcels together, basically giving our delivery people more capacity or more space to deliver what are ultimately bigger items. Electricity fits into the story in terms of the Paxton are an electric delivery vehicle. We conducted a global search for the right type of vehicle that would allow us to deliver efficiently from the footpath in New Zealand, and ultimately the Paxton, with its combination of operational excellence, but also electricity was important to us, particularly in New Zealand, given we've got a large renewable energy base. We saw it at a trade show and intuitively we felt it would meet our growing challenges around delivery of the items we need to deliver. But then from that idea went a significant amount of testing, both in analysis desktop, but also in trying in the field and ultimately a live pilot in New Plymouth. It's really important from an environmental sustainability perspective for our company, but also our customers are asking more and more for sustainable solutions. So the difference this will make for New Zealand Post is firstly it will allow us to deliver for lower cost, which ultimately allows us to keep our prices as tight as possible for our customers, and allows us to do that because it does replace the courier van and the postie bike. It allows us to deliver both of those predominantly together. Secondly, it is part of a suite of things we're doing to make it easier for New Zealanders to deliver, send and receive parcels. There are some countries who have started down this route, but we understand we will be one of the world leaders when it comes to the level of the use of a vehicle like a Paxton, and also the level of which we've integrated our mail and parcel delivery. We've been told by an independent consultancy company that we'd be probably in the top 3 globally in terms of the strides we're making in this area. So this is our new Paxton delivery vehicle, just arrived from its manufacturer in Norway.
Mark, tell me, how long does a charge on one of these last in terms of the posties run?
So the battery will last about 10 hours of delivery each day, but we would expect to use them about 8 or 9 hours each day, and then they'll go back to the branch and they'll charge overnight to be ready for use the next day.
Right, and how long does the charging process take?
Yeah, it's an overnight, so plug in and then they're good to go with 100% full battery in the morning.
And the 8 to 9 hours that you're using them for, is that about the same as what other countries are using them for, or are you sort of stretching that a bit?
Yeah, no, we are. So other countries are typically more using them for 6 or 7. So partly the improvement in battery life, and also partly how we're choosing to set them up with our rosters, etc., to ultimately make best use of our investment.
How fast can one of these things go?
So they're 45 kph flat out on the road, and then obviously they drive far slower than that on the footpath for safety, for public safety. So. Yep.
I think electric transportation's taken off faster than anyone had imagined, and those Paxtons are a perfect example.
I agree. I mean, just look around us now and there's Lime scooters everywhere, and it wasn't that long ago that people thought electric cars were futuristic, yet they're almost commonplace now. And now we've got electric dump trucks, and we're talking about electric aeroplanes. So What is the future of innovation in electricity?
In the next episode of Powering New Zealand, we meet the senior execs at Vector who are using a new way to look at the power grid and the young guns in the energy sector who are inventing the future.